Yesterday I went for a run, and on the trail that I run is a playground, and as I was coming up to it, there was a little boy standing right on the edge of the playground, and he said hi, and he's waving, and I said, hi, are you having a nice day playing? And what seemed to be maybe his grandfather came and swooped him up and turned around and ran off, and I thought, well, I know I don't look my best when I'm running, but I don't think I'm really a threat to anyone. I was running by, and it was just kind of funny to me because I was thinking about this scripture as I was running. I'm thinking about my talk and thinking about this scripture from Matthew chapter 18, verse 4. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child, and this child that I had just passed in his being humble was open, was receptive, was friendly. And so often we go about our lives or grow and it's not so anymore. We let fear or other things control us in our lives, like the grandfather, a little afraid for his little boy. And I share that with you today because we're talking about humility. We're using the book, The Gift of Anger by Arun Gandhi, who was Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, and he stayed with his grandfather for 2 years in the ashram in India when he was 12 to 14, and recently wrote this book, The Gift of Anger. And we're working with the chapter 8 today. Humility is strength. Humility requires a beginner's mind. It requires us to go back to that place in our childhood where we're open. And it's interesting, both the word humility and humble come from the same root word, the same Latin word humilis, which means low to the ground. So it means being grounded when we're humble, when we're in a state of humility. We're being grounded. We're being sure of ourselves. It means we're so confident, or Godfident, as I used that term last week, that we don't need to put on airs with anyone. We can just be ourselves. We don't need to put someone down so that we feel more important. We're seeing a lot of that right now. Humility is a freedom from pride and arrogance. It's an openness to learning and an openness to life. It's being childlike. It's often thought of as a sign of weakness, but it's not weakness, it's actually strength. If you don't have to put someone down or make someone else wrong in order to be able to be who you are, your authentic self, that's strong. That's a sign of strength. And letting go of that ego that needs to know everything, the ego that needs to be in control, and just letting it be. When we're humble, we know that we need each other, that we work together, that we're best when we're all connected and in harmony, and that everyone is integral to our society. Humility comes from a real healthy sense of self-worth. I'm not seeing a lot of that today. These times, as Robert talked about, these times can feel dark, can look chaotic, and a lot of divisiveness in our country, causing a lot of damage to our souls. We're not actually looking for the good. Many of us aren't looking for the good in others, but looking to be right. Instead of seeing through a spiritual lens, we're seeing what we want to see to make ourselves right. Maybe it's time we all had a piece of humble pie. That humble pie is filled with strength. It's filled with joy. We did the Book of Joy a few years ago, and one of the pillars of joy is to cultivate humility, to cultivate that. so that we're not feeling like we're above everyone else, that we're all equal in God's eyes. Arun Gandhi says in The Gift of Anger, believing that you are better than someone else leads to anger and violence and makes you blind to how closely connected we all are. With his Gandhi's deeply felt humility, he knew that discrimination of any kind is an assault on our combined humanity. Isn't that true? We're seeing a lot of discrimination right now, a lot of, on many sides, people who just want to be right and prove a point. We're especially seeing that with the racial injustice in our country. I've been watching a series of YouTube videos called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And these are led by Emmanuel Acho, who was a former NFL player. And his latest one is a two-part series where he's interviewing Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner. It was really fascinating. They were talking about how players take a knee during the anthem. And Roger Goodell was saying that at first, when this first started with Kaepernick a couple years ago, that he didn't say anything. There was never any conversation about it. There were never any fines or punishment for doing it, but there was never any conversation about it. And so he was saying how important it is to talk about it, to have these conversations. And a couple months ago, he put out a video saying that he supported everyone who exercised a right to bring attention to something that needs to be fixed in our country. He said the owners of the teams and the team players need to have these important conversations. And yeah, they're uncomfortable. About 90% of the team owners are white, and about 70% of NFL players are Black. And so having these conversations, they're really important to listen to each other, to come to a place of understanding. We need to try to help fix the climate of our current culture. Not an easy thing to do and not a quick fix. But it's important to have these conversations. I had my own uncomfortable conversations with a Black man last week. We have a friend, Kevin and I, his name is Glenn, and he's a Black man. And I asked him if we could have a conversation. I said, this is uncomfortable, but I want to ask you about Black Lives Matter, about the organization, and about how that feels to you. And he said, I don't know anything about the organization, and frankly, I don't really care about knowing about the organization, but the phrase Black Lives Matter is extremely important to me. He said, when I hear someone say no to that, or when I hear someone say all lives matter as a response to that, he said, to me it means you don't care about my life. You don't care about my two young Black boys' lives, and we're not friends. He says it's extremely important for people to stand behind Black Lives Matter. He's a 44-year-old man, and he said, I have never in my life been afraid, but I'm afraid now. He said, I don't go for a walk by myself anywhere, even in my own neighborhood where people mostly know me. I always bring my boys with me. I don't go to the grocery store by myself. And if I am at a store and I need to get my phone out of my pocket, I hold it up for any security cameras in the store to see that it's a phone and not a weapon. I can't imagine having to live like that, having to live in fear just because of the color of your skin. It's sad to me. There's a short little meme going around on Facebook about Jesus and the 100 sheep, or the good shepherd, actually, and the sheep. And how the good shepherd will leave his 99 sheep and go in search of that one sheep that is in trouble. And that's what we're doing with Black Lives Matter, supporting those that are in trouble, supporting those that have been marginalized for so long, for hundreds of years. And it's not the same. Some of us say, well, with my humility, I tolerate other people. I tolerate those people that don't think like me, that don't look like me, that don't believe like me, that don't live like I do. But tolerance is just another way of saying that I'm better than you, that my way of life is better than you, that my beliefs are the right beliefs and they're better than yours. It's comparing ourselves to other people and holding ourselves above. There's a wonderful scripture, parable, in the book of Luke, chapter 18, verses 10 to 4, goes like this. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, and even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. I love that parable, especially when you look at it metaphysically. Because metaphysically, we look at every character in the Bible as an aspect of us. The Pharisee is that part of ourselves which is concerned with the external and how it looks and following the rules. And the tax collector is that part of ourselves that feels we're not worthy. Tax collectors in that time were deemed unclean and evil. They were Jewish citizens who were working for the Romans to collect taxes. And so the Pharisee in this parable is comparing himself. He's trying to establish his worth by saying, I'm not like those other people. I'm better than those other people. Look at what I do. Look at what they do. The truth is, we are never greater or less than anyone. We are all equal in spirit. There are no spiritual ratings or rankings with God. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, meaning all who see themselves as better. Life has a way of showing us otherwise, doesn't it? So true. And it doesn't bring us down as a punishment. It's more of just an awareness of where we've been in consciousness. It's really an unmasking of the self-delusion for our highest good. It's always for our highest good. But all who humble themselves will be exalted, means we will be lifted up by our awareness of the Christ within. When we're humble, when we're grounded, when we know that we are all equal in God's eyes, we will be lifted in consciousness with a greater awareness, with a greater ability to see through a spiritual lens, not lifted above anyone else, but lifted up from where we've been to our next level of awareness. When we're humble and we practice humility, we know that strength comes from within. We can let our light shine and let everyone else's light shine and light up the whole planet with these lights when we're humble. We can be open to the childlike wonder and awe of life, knowing that We aren't meant to be here to hurt each other. We're here to help each other. Arun Gandhi says in The Gift of Anger, the lives and destinies of each of us are intertwined, and we need humility to recognize the truth of our interdependence. Isn't that so true? In the book, in this chapter 8, there's lots of stories. It was hard to choose out of the book. I totally recommend this book, which we don't have in the bookstore yet, but they're coming. They're coming. But there's a story in this chapter about Arun and his grandfather. And they spent an hour each day together, spinning on their spinning wheel and talking and having good conversation. And this day, Arun's grandfather came to him and said, okay, now's the time. What I want you to do is take your spinning wheel apart. And Arun just went okay and started taking it apart, got all the little pieces, and his grandfather said, now we will spin. And Arun said, I can't spin. My spinning wheel is all taking apart, as you told me. And he said, well, I guess you better put it back together then. So as Arun was putting the spinning wheel back together, Mahatma Gandhi grabbed a tiny little spring and took it and kept it. And Arun got to the very end and said, Grandfather, I can't finish this without that spring. And he said, oh, this is just a tiny little piece. Surely you don't need this little piece. And Arun said, no, I can't finish putting it together without that piece. His grandfather said, that is the lesson for today. No matter what your part, no matter how small you feel, no matter what role you have in this universe, no matter what your job is or how insignificant you might feel, you are integral to the whole. You are needed. And you wouldn't be called to these times, if you weren't meant to be here during this time. Your time is not up. If you're still breathing, we're still here, needing to recognize our interdependence, needing to recognize how much we need each other, that everyone is valuable and everyone is important. We need to lean into that. So this morning at our outdoor patio service, I had a basket of these things. Remember these when you were a kid, these finger traps where you put your fingers in? They're woven. I don't know what this material is, but they're woven as a reminder that we are woven, we are intertwined together. And as we try to pull away or resist other people, what happens? We get stuck. We get stuck in our wanting to compare, wanting to be right. We get trapped in that. And it's not until we lean in, until we lean our fingers in, that we are free, that we are able to pull ourselves away from that, needing to be better than or needing to be right. When we're pulling away, we're contracted, we're tight. And when we lean in, we are expanded. We're seeing through a spiritual lens. There's a loosening of our points of view, which frees us from one-upmanship, frees us from the need to prove our point. So where in your life could you lean in to be more free? Have that piece of humble pie. I tell you, it's not an easy thing to eat that pie. This week, I haven't been seeing this in the world. I've been seeing a lot of divisiveness, and they talk about in the chapter, Arun Gandhi talks about in the chapter how a lot of times we make up our minds on a particular whatever issue going on, and then we look for evidence to prove ourselves right. And I noticed that I'd been doing that with reading news articles every morning. Reading ones and just, yeah, I know that I have the right point of view on this perspective. So I'm on day 6 of no news, and it's freeing. It's freeing to not be in that trap, not be in that place of needing to prove that my point of view is the correct one. So instead, I've been doing some other reading. I just finished a book called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which was recommended by Christy Coates. Thank you, Christy. It's a beautiful book written by a black man where he's writing to his son, his 15-year-old son, and what it's like to grow up as a black man in our society, especially during the 60s, 70s. I'm also reading a fascinating book that was recommended by Bill Holmes called Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. This book is fascinating, and the author, he goes through the whole history of humankind and points to a lot of times where there's this divide between us. Is man inherently good or inherently bad? And every time, every study, every time there is some study or experiment to show that man is inherently bad, the author does his research and proves that no, that's not the case. We are good. People are inherently good. I'm also reading Good News Network, which is online. It's an online news station, whatever. And it has some really inspiring articles. Like this week, there was a married couple who had their wedding planned since last year. And of course, during COVID, they're unable to have the wedding that they wanted. And so instead of asking for a refund from their caterer, they decided that they were going to go ahead and buy the food and donate it all to a homeless shelter. And instead of just giving the food to the homeless shelter, they decided that they were going to say their vows, wear the bride wore her wedding gown and the groom was in his tux, and then go to the homeless shelter in those wedding garments and serve the homeless, their masks and their gloves on. Truly inspiring. And the joy that was in that room as they were serving these homeless people. They had just committed themselves to each other and committed to this sacred service. And there's another article about the oldest World War II veteran. His name is Lawrence Brooks. He turns 111 on September 12th, my birthday. And in the article, it says his wisdom is to eat right, stay healthy, and most importantly, be nice to people. That's how he got to 111. There's so much good in the world. There's so much hope in the world. If we focus on it, if we look for it. It's so easy to get caught up in the daily headlines. But there's a lot of good out there. There's a lot of good in here, in each of us. And when we have cultivated this sense of humility, humble ourselves, knowing that the Christ in me does the work. Let ourselves get out of the way. In fact, that's my header, my notes, my outline every Sunday. The Christ in me does the work. A reminder to get my personality self out of the way and let Spirit speak. Let Spirit say what needs to be said. And let what needs to be said be what needs to be heard. So we need to cultivate this humility. And how do we do that? Like Roger Goodell said, we listen. We have these uncomfortable conversations. We let go of that ego self that needs to be right and needs to have its way and have to control. We embrace our humanness. We don't always have to be right. We don't always get it right. And we can be grateful. Grateful for the good news that's in the world. Grateful for the good people, a lot of good people in the world who have come to this place already. You know, we wouldn't be here if we didn't choose these times. Our souls are needing to learn something in these times. So are you willing to eat a piece of humble pie? I promise you it's filled with strength, it's filled with joy, it's filled with happiness. Are you willing to loosen your need to be right? It's a tough one. Are you willing to cultivate humility and accept yourself and others as you are? The world so needs people that are willing to eat this humble pie. We are called to this. We've been called to this. Are we willing to choose it? Are we willing to do our part? We can do this. So I want us to move now into a time of meditation. I invite you to just settle yourself and don't be thinking about pie just yet. Take a deep breath. Gently close your eyes. Listen to these words from the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 1 to 3. Lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. We are all equal in God's eyes. I invite you to stay focused on those words while we rest in the stillness.